The morning air was crisp, the kind that bit at the skin and made every breath feel sharper. I stood in my pajamas, my slippers barely shielding my feet from the freezing pavement, staring at the same infuriating sight that had greeted me nearly every morning for the past few months. Megan's car parked squarely in my driveway again. A familiar surge of anger crawled up my spine as I clenched my fists. My engine was running, my bag slung over one shoulder, but there was no way I was getting out without her moving that car. My driveway, my property, and yet there it was, her smug metallic blue sedan sitting there like it owned the place. I stormed up to her front door, each step fueling the fire inside me. I pounded on the wood with more force than necessary, waiting for the inevitable. A few seconds passed before the door swung open. There she stood, arms crossed, wearing that same insufferable smirk she always did when she knew she was about to be a problem. "What now?" she drawled, tilting her head as if she had just been woken from the most peaceful nap of her life. "You know what? Move your car, Megan." She sighed, stretching her arms in an exaggerated yawn before rolling her eyes. "I'll move it in a few minutes. I was just about to head out anyway." "You always say that." I could hear the barely contained frustration in my own voice. "And then it's an hour or two, or you just forget. I have somewhere to be." Megan shrugged, leaning against the door frame like this was some casual conversation about the weather. "Relax, it's just a driveway. You can wait." My blood boiled. "It's not just a driveway. It's my driveway. I pay for it, and I need to use it." She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh my God, it's not like I'm parking here forever. I don't see the big deal." That was always her excuse. It wasn't a big deal. It was just a driveway. I should relax. But every time she parked there, she stole my time, my space, my patience. It wasn't just about inconvenience anymore. It was about respect, and Megan had none. This had been going on for months. At first, I thought it was an accident. Maybe a guest had taken the wrong spot. Maybe she was in a rush. I gave her the benefit of the doubt the first time I knocked on her door politely. She had laughed it off, muttering something about needing to unload groceries and promising she'd move in 5 minutes. She didn't. The second time, I left a note, simple, direct: "Please don't park in my driveway. Thanks." The next morning, I found the note crumpled in the gutter. The third time, I called her out more firmly. "Megan, you can't park here. It's not a suggestion." She simply smiled and walked away. It only got worse from there. Some days, she'd park for hours. Other days, she'd wedge her car so close to mine that I'd have to crawl into the driver's seat from the passenger side just to leave. Once, she even double-parked, blocking both my driveway and part of the street just to prove a point. I tried everything, calling the HOA, reporting it to the property management, even threatening to have it towed. But Megan was slippery. She always moved the car just in time to avoid consequences, and when I mentioned towing again, she had the audacity to laugh. "What are you going to do, call the cops?" she taunted one afternoon. "Go ahead, waste their time. See if they care." The worst part was she was right. It wasn't a matter the police would prioritize, and she knew it. She had found a loophole in the system, a way to make my life miserable without ever technically breaking a law, and she reveled in it. Then came the day she truly crossed the line. I had an early morning meeting one I couldn't afford to miss. I was already running late, coffee in one hand, laptop bag in the other, when I saw her car, as expected, planted right across my driveway. I ran to her door, knocking so hard I was sure the neighbors could hear. When she finally answered, she was still in her robe, sipping from a mug as if I were the inconvenience in her day. "Megan, I swear, move your damn car." She yawned again, looking me up and down with lazy amusement. "I'll get to it." "No, not later. Now." She stared at me for a long moment, as if debating whether to push me further. Then, with a theatrical sigh, she set her mug down and disappeared inside. I stood there waiting, pulse pounding. 2 minutes passed. 5. 10. I knocked again. No answer. 15 minutes later, she finally emerged, keys in hand, walking with the slowest, most deliberate steps I'd ever seen. She got into her car, turned the engine over, and then she just sat there. I could feel my nails digging into my palm as I watched her adjust her mirrors, fiddle with the radio, check her phone. She was playing a game. She knew exactly what she was doing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she backed out just far enough for me to get through. I jumped into my car, reversed at record speed, and sped off, barely glancing in my rearview mirror. I was late, missed the opening of my meeting, and had to scramble to catch U-Paul because Megan thought my driveway was her personal parking space. That was the moment I knew being reasonable wasn't going to work. Megan wasn't going to change. She enjoyed making my life difficult. She thrived on my frustration, fed off the fact that I had no real way to fight back. But she was wrong because I did have a way, and she was about to find out exactly what happens when you push someone too far. I spent the rest of the day simmering, my mind replaying the morning's events in an endless loop. Megan's smug face, her deliberate slowness, the way she sipped her coffee while I stood outside fuming. She had turned my frustration into her own personal form of entertainment. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't just mad anymore. I was done. Done waiting. Done arguing. Done being the reasonable neighbor while she laughed at my frustration. She thought she was untouchable, that she could keep pushing without consequence. That was about to change. I didn't need to fight her. I didn't need to yell. What I needed was a plan. The idea hit me later that night, while I was scrolling mindlessly through videos, still too wired with frustration to sleep. One clip in particular caught my attention, an old prank video where someone had glued a thief's shoes to the ground. The poor guy had tried to run, only to realize too late that he was stuck. He had wobbled, cursed, struggled, but there was nothing he could do. And just like that, the perfect idea took shape. Megan wanted to keep parking in my driveway. Fine. She could stay there as long as she wanted for a very, very long time. I spent the next 2 days preparing every detail. It had to be perfect, calculated, subtle, undeniable. The last thing I needed was to leave any evidence that could tie it back to me. I started by researching adhesives, comparing strengths, dry times, and weather resistance. It had to be something that would hold fast even under the weight of a car, but not something so obvious she'd notice right away. After extensive research, I settled on industrial-grade superglue. This wasn't the cheap dollar store kind that peeled away with a little effort. This was the type used in construction, the kind that bonded instantly and cured to an unbreakable grip. I bought 3 large bottles, paying in cash at a hardware store 2 towns over. No paper trail, no receipts tied to my name, just a quiet little purchase that would soon become Megan's worst nightmare. That night, under the cover of darkness, I went to work. The neighborhood was silent, save for the occasional hoot of an owl in the distance. Megan's house was dark, her car parked exactly where I expected it to be. My heart pounded as I crouched near the edge of my driveway, the cold night air biting at my skin. I worked quickly but methodically, squeezing the glue onto the pavement in a thin, nearly invisible layer. Too much, and it would be noticeable. Too little, and it wouldn't hold. I focused on the exact spots where her tires always landed, coating just enough of the surface to ensure she'd be stuck the moment she tried to leave. By the time I was finished, my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer anticipation of what was about to unfold. I stood back, admiring my work. There was no visible trace, no obvious signs of tampering, just a quiet, empty driveway waiting for its victim. And now, all I had to do was wait. The next morning, I made sure to act normal. I went about my routine, sipping my coffee by the window, pretending to scroll through my phone while keeping one eye on the driveway. Right on schedule, Megan appeared, her keys jingling in her hand as she walked to her car with the same carefree arrogance she always carried. She climbed into the driver's seat, adjusted her mirrors, checked her phone. For a brief second, I felt a flicker of doubt. What if it didn't work? What if the glue wasn't strong enough? Then she turned the key. The engine roared to life. And nothing happened. Megan frowned, giving the gas pedal a firmer push. The car revved loudly, but it didn't move an inch. She tried again, this time with more force. Her expression twisted in confusion. Still nothing. I could barely contain my excitement. She threw the car into drive, as if maybe rolling forward would break the invisible hold. The tires groaned, the engine strained, but the car remained completely stuck. Her confusion morphed into frustration. She yanked the gear shift, stomped on the gas harder. The tires squealed, but didn't budge. I watched as realization dawned in her eyes. Something was wrong. Very wrong. She threw the door open, stepping out to inspect her tires. She crouched down, running her hand over the pavement, then tried to wiggle one of the wheels as if she could force it free. When it didn't move, she stood up abruptly, pulling out her phone. I didn't need to hear her words to know she was calling for help. Minutes later, a tow truck rumbled down the street. I casually stepped outside, pretending to check my mail, just in time to catch the exchange. The driver, a burly man with a gruff voice, took one look at her tires and let out a low whistle. "Well, that's a new one," he said, kneeling beside the car. He ran a hand over the pavement, then tapped the tire. "Lady, your wheels are glued to the ground." Megan's face turned several shades of red. "What? That's ridiculous. Who would do that?" The tow truck driver shrugged. "Don't know, but this ain't coming off easy. You're looking at some serious work to get this thing free. Probably going to need new tires. Maybe even a whole new undercarriage if the glue got into the axle." Megan's jaw dropped. "You're kidding." "Nope. And the tow's going to cost you extra, 'cause we're dealing with a special case here." I almost laughed out loud. Megan sputtered, completely at a loss for words. She looked around as if expecting someone to step forward and confess. But no one did. The neighborhood had finally turned against her. The audience of irritated homeowners she'd tormented for months stood in silent satisfaction. She had no one to blame but herself. After a few more minutes of fruitless arguing, she finally gave in, throwing her hands in the air and storming back inside to grab her wallet. The tow truck driver went to work, shaking his head as he prepared to drag her car free at the cost of her tires, her dignity, and her wallet. I turned on my heel, walking back inside with a victorious smirk. Megan had spent months making my life hell, treating my driveway like her own personal parking space, ignoring my requests, mocking my frustration. She had thought she was untouchable. Not anymore. The best part? There was nothing she could do. No proof. No evidence. No way to pin it on me. Just an expensive lesson in consequences and the knowledge that she had finally, irreversibly lost. The sound of Megan's furious ranting carried through the crisp morning air, each word laced with disbelief and indignation. She paced beside the tow truck, arms flailing as she argued with the driver, who remained unimpressed by her theatrics. It was the first time I had ever seen her look powerless, and I savored every second of it. Her perfectly polished nails clicked against her phone screen as she furiously typed, probably crafting some exaggerated complaint to anyone who would listen. Maybe a Facebook post about how the world was against her, how she had been targeted and vandalized. It didn't matter. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and there was no one left to blame. The tow truck driver knelt next to the car, muttering to himself as he inspected the mess. Megan hovered over him, her voice shrill. "Can't you just pull it free?" The man snorted. "Lady, if I do that, I'm ripping the tires clean off." Her eyes widened. "What? Yeah, you got yourself in a real predicament here," he said, straightening up and wiping his hands on his coveralls. "Looks like this glue's seeped into the treads. It's fused tight. You're not just getting a tow, you're getting new tires. Maybe even some axle damage if it's bad enough." Megan let out a strangled noise somewhere between a growl and a whimper. "That's going to cost a fortune." The tow driver shrugged indifferently. "That's how it is. Could be worse." Megan's face twisted. "How could it be worse?" "Well," he said, pausing dramatically, "at least you ain't the one who did it." He let out a chuckle and climbed into his truck, readying the winch. That would be a real shame. I had to step inside before I laughed loud enough to give myself away. The moment I shut my front door, I exhaled, relishing the satisfaction. This wasn't just about the inconvenience she had caused me. This was about all the times she had smirked in my face, dismissed my complaints, acted like she was untouchable. It was about justice, about balance being restored in a way that felt far more poetic than anything the HOA or law enforcement could have delivered. By the time the tow truck finally began to pull Megan's car free, half the neighborhood had gathered, pretending to be engaged in routine tasks while secretly watching the spectacle unfold. Mrs. Peterson, who had lived 2 houses down for 20 years, swept the same spot on her porch over and over, a knowing smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth. The Johnsons, a quiet couple who usually kept to themselves, stood by their mailbox, whispering and nodding toward the scene. Even old Mr. Ramirez, who rarely left his rocking chair, had shuffled outside to witness the downfall. Megan, now aware of her unwilling audience, straightened her spine and attempted to reclaim her usual air of superiority. "I'm the victim here," she muttered loudly, as if someone would step in to console her. This is vandalism. Someone glued my car down. This is illegal. I should call the police. The tow truck driver sighed. Yeah, you go ahead and do that. I'm sure they'll put out an APB for the glue bandit. That earned a stifled chuckle from one of the neighbors. Megan's glare swept over them like a storm cloud, but for once, no one looked away in discomfort. No one came to her defense. The spell of intimidation she had held over this neighborhood was broken, shattered by the sheer absurdity of her situation. She paid the driver with stiff movements, handing over her credit card as if she were being robbed at gunpoint. The total, judging by the way her face paled, was brutal. Tow fees, tire replacements, possible axle damage. It was a deliciously expensive inconvenience, and the best part? She still had to deal with getting the glue off her driveway. When the truck finally pulled her car away, Megan stood there motionless, staring at the sticky, ruined patch of pavement where her vehicle had once been. It was as if she was finally processing the full extent of her loss. Then, without a word, she turned and stormed inside, slamming her front door so hard that a nearby bird shot out of a tree in fright. For the first time in months, my driveway was empty. I didn't see her for the rest of the day or the next. At first, I wondered if she had finally learned her lesson. If the financial sting and public humiliation had been enough to make her change her ways. But then, 2 days later, I saw her creeping around her car, which she had parked carefully in her own driveway. For once, she was inspecting it like a detective at a crime scene, running her hands over every surface, checking for scratches, looking beneath the wheel wells. She even crouched down to examine her new tires, as if trying to solve some invisible mystery. She knew, maybe not exactly how it had happened, but she knew she had been outplayed, and it was killing her. I let her stew in it. Days passed, then weeks. Not once did she park in my driveway again. She still sent the occasional glare in my direction whenever we crossed paths, but that was all. No more smug smiles. No more mocking laughter. Just quiet, seething bitterness. Victory had never tasted so sweet. One evening, I sat on my porch with a drink in hand, enjoying the peaceful sight of my empty driveway. The sunset cast a golden glow over the neighborhood, and for the first time in what felt like ages, everything was calm. That was when I heard the sound of a notification pinging on my phone. Curious, I glanced down to see a message from an unknown number. Unknown, I know what you did. I stared at the screen for a moment before chuckling. No threats. No accusations. Just that single sentence filled with impotent fury. I typed back, me? Then you know not to park in my driveway ever again. I hit send, took another sip of my drink, and leaned back with a satisfied sigh. Megan might have known, but she also knew there was nothing she could do about it.